Thank you. Senator Pagliarini?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Murrow, a couple of the slides, we're putting our eggs in the basket on these 5+2, and our projected job growth is 1.2 in the defense industry, 0.9%. We're talking a couple of hundred jobs per industry sector that you've identified. Is that what you're projecting now, or with all these, with the $60.5 million that is proposed as part of this? What does that number represent?
No, those are their current compound annual growth.
Okay.
So, and a couple of them are still coming out of significant damage through the crisis, especially, say, in your manufacturing areas or your design area, which, design is arguably much healthier than it looks in those numbers because such a blow, came with the toy damage, for instance.
I sat through the Quonset Point legislative meeting that they held, and they're projecting 3,000 new jobs. I mean, is that's not reflected in these numbers here?
We did some exercises internally to look at possible very realistic additions to the growth trajectory, and we think that with doing a subset of these activities, the state could certainly move itself significantly up a quintile or two in the state growth rankings.
Two-part question.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that these are marked on 2013 as your base year, and the passage of the roadworks bill.
Right.
Is this report outdated and obsolete right now?
I don't think so. Those are just a readout. Let's see. Our data would. You're saying can we would not necessarily use those growth figures that we show as a projection at all of where they're going.
But I guess I'll be very specific. You're targeting as one of the opportunities the logistics warehousing industry, but that does not factor in the crippling effect that tolls may have on that industry. So is that a legitimate section to this report, not having analyzed the roadworks bill and the passage last month of it?
Well, actually, I think it's a factor, but there are lots of other factors to be considered. Those growth rates don't factor in, new policy, either or the ones that we recommend here. That was passed, I think, after our report was basically done. But yeah, sure, you can look. You should consider our data on the growth rates of which are recent past growth rates. Those are not projections. So you can speculate about the impacts of that program or our programs. We think our programs would accelerate growth. Other things the state could do could accelerate growth. You could argue about how that program would affect them.
Let me add, if I may, Senator and Mark, the report also doesn't take into account the renewed confidence in the strength of our infrastructure. The report also doesn't take into account the construction jobs that will be generated by the roadworks program. So there are countervailing factors when you think about the roadworks program, many of them positive, and I would argue those positive factors are the most persuasive ones.
And you just led credence to the next statement, which is, should we not, before we adopt the state economic plan, address those shortcomings, positive and minus? We're adopting the state economic plan here. Should we not factor in the deficiencies you just cited before we adopt it?
I just cited assets, not deficiencies, but
Well,
I think we...
they're not in the report, they're
for
deficient.
Every element of the report, there are numerous factors we can take into account, but I think the idea that the logistics industry, for example, might be supported by the reliability of our infrastructure should persuade us to invest even more in the idea of that as a cluster.
And that might be
that
might be the ultimate result. I'm not advocating yes or no. I'm advocating somebody spent a lot of money on this report. Shouldn't it be current at its adoption?
I believe it is because of the reasons I just expressed. And what I would say is, if this report is not a living report, we're in trouble. This report needs to, as a framework, provide us the opportunity to continue to dialogue about, debate, and advance policies that will aid Rhode Island's economy. I think it does that. If you wait for a moment in time when all the evidence is in, you'll be waiting forever. I think, Senator, that it's very fresh information, and
Are the 2015 economic numbers available?
Which numbers?
All of them. Everything that's in here that's benchmarked in 2013. How do we know that these industries have not already received a 1% increase in employment?
We used the most recent data we had for comparability, so we could compare these industries state and nationally. You're absolutely right. The figures provided are not meant as projections based on particular policy interventions. Those are just straight line, projections of the straight line that the state has been on in the last few years.
Mr. Morrow, you made the comment that commercially relevant researchers at the university is something that you strive for. Would that affect salary structure, and how does that reconcile with the contracts? It sounds like if I'm bringing in a commercially relevant researcher, I'm going to have to pay him more.
Yeah, that's interesting. The thing to think about here, this may be a way of increasing quality, increasing commercial relevance without the state itself or the university system having to do all of the spending. We see frequently these bring in, and we envision industry and philanthropy as part of the picture in putting together compensation packages. That is the way it's played out in some other states. You have the opportunity to increase the quality, increase the relevance, and bring in other partners. And I think we like the idea of industry involvement. Industry is the one that can really vouch for the relevance of these scholars.
This report focuses on future jobs. Are we leaving behind, the term you used was non-technical manufacturing jobs? Are they being left behind in the state of Rhode Island? Or are you of the mindset that it's gone already?
In the manufacturing space, I think the somewhat sad story is that most of the manufacturing that remains is your more durable. So you've lost some of the bulk of your labor-intensive non-advanced manufacturing. Most of that went. We can argue about. I have a lot of opinions about U.S. trade policy and so on. I think we've done no service to our run-of-the-mill manufacturing guys. I think most of those guys, or fewer of them, remain, and the ones that do are the ones that are moving upstream and are trying to embrace new technologies and are doing a pretty good job of it.
What benefit does this report give, not a Main Street business, but a small Rhode Island manufacturer, a small Rhode Island, 95% of our businesses are small guys. Yeah. What does this specific economic plan do for them if they're not in one of these growth areas?
Take that.
Well, first, I think many of your manufacturers are tied either to these growth areas or to the supply chains for them. Just looking at the defense or shipbuilding supply chains, you're pulling in a large swath of outstanding, often small manufacturing, tooling, or engineering companies. So there's that. I think there's also the impact of accelerated growth in the state and a better economic environment, creating markets for these guys. And then I think we're in a way trying to refocus the state on production in part. And there are going to be, I think some of these programs that are being discussed have a lot of value for other manufacturers as well as ones in these higher tech areas.
Two additional responses to that. Senator, first, the work of the Economic Development Planning Council involved a number of things. It involved helping to inform this report and recommend it. It also involved identifying those targeted industries for the aforementioned incentive programs and identifying fragile industries. So the 5+2 industries are identified as targeted industries for the reasons that I've explained, for, in essence, bonus provisions in our statutes pertaining to the jobs incentives and the Rebuild Rhode Island brick and mortar incentives. We also identified fragile industries. As a result of the good work done by the Brookings team, we were able to say that manufacturing on the one hand and seafood/fisheries are industries that are historically important in Rhode Island, that where strands of them, for example, advanced manufacturing, may be uptrending and may merit major investment and may help to drive our economy as a whole. Even those manufacturing firms that are not, quote unquote, advanced are of importance and may be driving parts of our economy. So our Qualified Jobs Incentive Act, for example, flexes certain provisions to enable manufacturers to be eligible no matter whether they're advanced or not. And the Economic Development Planning Council, by absorbing the content of this report and identifying manufacturing as a fragile industry, enables us to make those investments through the jobs incentive in manufacturers across the board in Rhode Island. In addition, it's important to note that the report thinks carefully about issues pertaining to small business, and small business inclusive of smaller manufacturers. Most of our manufacturers are smaller businesses, and makes a number of recommendations. One of them, illustratively on page 108, pertaining to friendliness to small business, that's the terminology of the report, speaks to regulatory reform. It's important that we create a stable and sound tax structure. It's important that we make investments through incentives. It's also important that we strip away the regulations that may be in the way, and the report recommends that.
And that was my next couple of questions. My line.
I don't want to interrupt, but we do have a couple of others, and I'd like to try to get them in before we have to break to go to
two
the
more
floor.
questions, Mr. Chairman.
If we could come back to you,
Sure.
that would be great. Senator Pagliarini?
All right. The report is very broad on many different areas, and it doesn't, I mean, everybody has different expectations, but I think it's light on detail as far as, like, the commission, the secretary said, we're going to change regulation, but there's not, like, proposed regulations. Like, if this was a local comprehensive plan, it would say, these are the implementations, you should be looking at this, you should be looking at this. So the question is, how do you answer somebody who says, do we need this report? Wouldn't it be easier to just reduce taxes, eliminate regulation, and let the marketplace decide?
Well, first thing I'll say is actually the report itself, even at this 170 pages, is in fact built as a summary in many respects of the underlying painfully detailed memos that we provided examining particular topics like UI. I could send you, a 5-page memo, diagnosing what's wrong with your UI system now. We've done the homework on this, so I could share. And there are other. These recommendations are distilled and summarized in the main report, but there's a lot more underneath them that I think can be useful for policy making. Now, first, I would just say, simply a deregulation and tax reduction strategy is unfortunately not going to. You need to reposition the state's economy in some of these higher return, high value industries. If you do simply the moves you've suggested, I think you'll get more of the same economy. You won't reposition. You will not be taking any action then to reposition yourself in relationship to the most prosperous states. You might get more, but I don't think that you will get better. And I think there's a lot of literature about that.
Just follow up on that statement, though, that the most prosperous, in your opinion, versus the marketplace determining itself? You said we'll get more of the same, but wouldn't the marketplace determine that which we're going to survive and not survive in?
I think the marketplace is making big decisions about your state and is harming you right now. The pure marketplace has basically sought to offshore your lower-end manufacturing, for instance. That is an example of the need for some degree of steering or direction at the state.
Senator Pearson had spoken to you about the emergence of a private civic organization, and you mentioned universities, nonprofits. Do you think, in your travels, do we have too many business organizations in the state? Do we have too many Chamber of Commerces? I mean, the number one business entity, member-wise, I believe, is the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Should we only have one for the state? Do we need all these independent Chamber of Commerces?
Yeah, I don't know. You certainly have a history of, small municipalities, and there is a history of having a lot of them. I think that modern economic development may be able to, keep some of these layers, but I think there is a need to develop a much more, streamlined approach in the end. And we do think that the kind of business civic organization that we're talking about can add a degree of decisiveness, and it becomes a channel for bringing in more resources into the picture.
And last question, transparency question. The fact that you are funded by a nonprofit that nobody knows who contributes it to, how do you answer that this is a unbiased report? We don't know who donated to the charitable organizations that funded you. So how do we know that this report is not skewed?
We are frequently funded by philanthropies. I believe that the philanthropies that have supported this work, are well regarded in the state and do represent. They are Rhode Island institutions. But even then, our funders and philanthropies don't influence our output. Brookings has, very clear, really clearly adheres to its independence and requires its independence. And frankly, we've appreciated the space we've been given to do our work. And I think it's independent, high-quality work.